Back. All right, we're going to get started. So, welcome. This is an introduction to ethical hacking. Today, we're going to be going on a little bit of a journey. We're going to go behind the scenes of what it's like to be an ethical hacker, and in a few ways, what it's like to be an unethical hacker. So, who am I? I'm Brandon. So, who is this Brandon guy, and why does anybody care? So, my name is Brandon Keith, Senior Security Engineer at D&H Distributing, which is a multi-billion-dollar distribution company. We serve this area nationally. We're all over the place. I'm just finishing up my master's in Cybersecurity Information Assurance. I'm 2 weeks away from finishing, so I'm almost done, except I start school again in the fall towards a doctorate. So a little bit of a review. So I'm the C Council Certified Ethical Hacker and Certified Hacking Forensics Investigator, which basically means I've studied a lot, took a lot of tests. But it also means done a lot with hacking and ethical hacking. I like to program in Python and hack things, as you probably imagine. So, all right, so the agenda for tonight, we're going to talk about what is a hacker, what makes an ethical hacker, what's the mindset of a hacker, and what or who do hackers target, because it's very specific who many of them target. And then we'll talk about the defenses that hackers work to break down, to break through. We're going to go through the hacker methodology. There's 5 phases in the standard hacker methodology: reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, and then covering their tracks. And then we're going to talk a little bit about web hacking, because this is a .NET developer group, so we're going to relate it a little bit back to web hacking, how the web applications get hacked. We're going to talk about the new, updated OWASP Top 10. So if you were here in my previous presentation a year ago, this will be different. We're going to talk about the OWASP testing guide. We're going to talk about some cool tools, FERC Suite and OWASP Zap. That's 2 tools we're going to be talking about. And then we're going to talk about WebGoat, VLAT, and Juice Shop, which very creative names, right? They're going to be applications that are vulnerable that you can actually test your hacking skills against. And then we're going to talk about how you can become a bug bounty hunter and what that actually is. So what is a hacker? Well, there's a modern version of the meaning of hacker, and then there is what the original meaning of the word hacker. The modern version, if you look up on Wikipedia or any dictionary, will say a hacker is a person who uses computers to gain unauthorized access to data, with a synonym to that being a cyber criminal. So hacker has kind of a negative connotation. Back in the 80s and 90s, if you were a hacker, it meant you were just a really smart guy. You were a skilled computer expert that used your technical knowledge to overcome a very sophisticated problem. So the terminology has kind of changed. So it used to mean you were just a really smart person. Now it means we should send you to jail. Correct. So very big flip, and the media has a lot to do with it. So this brings us now to this term, which some people call misnomer. So what exactly is then an ethical hacker? If we know what the old term means and we know what the new term means, what's an ethical hacker? Well, an ethical hacker is someone who does hacking, and they do it with permission. So if you're going to hack into a website or hack into an application, you've gotten permission, or you own whatever the infrastructure, device, or website you're hacking is. It's that permission that separates you from being ethical or unethical, right? That malicious nature. And for those who see the reference, I have the white spy versus black spy. So what's the mindset of a hacker? Well, the mindset of a hacker is to move fast and break things. Hackers only need to find one hole in a defense, whether it be a website, a desktop application, an operating system, an IoT device, whatever device a hacker is trying to break into, they only need to find one hole. And as you see, there's a lovely hole right there, right? So that in a castle wall, right? So that's what hackers like to do, move fast and break things. So who do hackers target? They target everyone. They target all kinds of people, financial institutions, small businesses, big businesses. It doesn't matter what business you're in, hackers will target you. 58%. Right here, 58% of victims are categorized as small businesses. I often hear small businesses say when I talk to them about cybersecurity, I'm way too small, hackers not going to be targeting me. They actually are. Almost 58% of them. And those are the hackers we know about, because the really good ones we don't know about. That's why they're good. So let's talk about this defense in depth idea. So just like you have a castle, right? I have a pretty image of a castle here. There's lots of defenses to this castle. We have a moat, we have a drawbridge, we have an outer wall, another inner wall, courtyard with another wall, several gates, right? The same way that that wall is set up, in cybersecurity, defenders set up multiple layers of defense to ensure that hackers can't break in. Whether it be a web application or a network you're defending, the same rule applies. You don't want to just rely on a single point of failure, right? A single point of entry that a hacker can break into again. So it's important. But a hacker will often look at this as a challenge. It's just another wall that they have to break down. And many people consider because of this, it's only a matter of time before a hacker gets into an organization. Because they'll eventually break through all the layers of defense. So from a cybersecurity perspective, the ideal way is we have enough layers of defense to detect when a hacker breaks in, to be able to kick them in, and stop a breach from becoming, massive, like a breach to like a credit reporting industry that, lost the entire United States record today. I can't think of any credits of equal that. So let's talk about those 5 phases. The first phase we're going to talk about is reconnaissance. Does anyone here, when you think about reconnaissance, what do you normally think of? What do you think of, Jason?
Military.
Think of the military? And what do they do when they do reconnaissance in the military?
Try to understand their.
Exactly. So the first thing that a hacker does is they want to understand who it is they're hacking. They want to know who their enemy or their target is. So what do you think might be a good way for a hacker to find out information on their target? If I'm looking to hack into a company or I belong to a criminal organization, what would be the first thing?
Google search.
That's a great one.
Tell me website.
Company website. Right? But what if I don't even want to visit the company website and get information? What about job ads? Right? There's a lot of information in job ads. This one right here, so I figured out they have IBM and Lenovo laptops. I found out they're running Office 2010. There might be some nice vulnerabilities I can take advantage of. I know that they're using Cisco phone systems. Those could potentially be vulnerable. I know they're running Windows 7. So, from a single job ad, I've not visited their website, I've not done anything, but I figured out potentially critical parts of their infrastructure. So let's look over here from a web application perspective. Let's relate everything back. From this ad, what can I tell? I can tell that they're running WordPress, PHP 5, MySQL. They run a bunch of MVC frameworks. I can know that they're using Git, but that's pretty common. But this tells me a little bit about what they're running. I know more information than I had before. So let's take this up a notch. So I want to get more information on their website. Maybe I don't want to actually visit it yet. Use this tool called Shodan.io, which is an advanced search engine that hackers actually use to do reconnaissance on websites. So this is reconnaissance I did on brandonkeith.com. Right? So you can see right there, I'm hosted on Liquid Web. That's my hosting company that I host my website on. And you can see a lot of information here. So without even going to the website, you can see I'm running on Apache. You can see a lot of different information. So without even visiting the website, from job ads and just search databases, without going to the website, I already have a profile on who I want to attack. And here's a tip. A lot of companies, despite the cloud, a lot of companies still host their email servers on premise. So if you ping a company's email server, you'll often find out what their domain is, even if you're not using these tools. So let's do some reconnaissance, shall we? Let's look at Central Penn's website. Let's do a little bit of reconnaissance, and they're probably gonna get mad at me for this, but we're gonna look at some of the HTTP headers. What can we tell from this? What do you think? They might be running ASP.NET. And I might just know exactly what version that is. Just from the headers. I'm gonna verify to see if they're actually handling their errors properly, and they're not. I was able to force an exception on their website. If you're in web development, you know you want to make sure all exceptions are handled gracefully. In this case, their website's not. So this might actually be something I want to inform them and let them know. Hey, I don't think you're handling your website gracefully. So let's go to another example. Let's take a look at Lancaster Online. I like this example. It shows another way you can do reconnaissance. So who knows what a robot.txt is? So a robot.txt actually tells Google's bots where they're supposed to not go. And in this case, it's saying to disallow to TN CMS. Now there's no security involved in that, but by doing that, I was able to figure out that Lancaster Online is using block CMS. So I could figure out exactly what their backend was working on just by going to the robots.txt. So, what is reconnaissance? It's information gathering. Before I attack a target, I want to have all the information I possibly can have. Because if I have all the information, I know what version of software you're running, I know what applications you're running, then I can target those applications. I can look for those vulnerabilities that I can exploit as a hacker. So that's the first stage in the hacker methodology, is simply just gathering information. It doesn't sound very exciting, right? It's not what you typically think of when you think about hacker, but that's really the first step. So now the next step. So once you've done that, once you've done your reconnaissance, you can do what we call scanning. So this is where I'm actively going out and looking for those devices. I'm actually creating traffic on those websites or internally on those networks. I want to create traffic and see what happens. So in this case, I'm actively. Nothing I've done so far has really alerted anyone that I'm snooping around so much. But this will. So a great example here. So I came in to prepare for this meeting on Saturday because I wanted to make sure my laptop would hook up properly. And I got connected to the guest Wi-Fi. I noticed an interesting thing. There's this great tool called Fing. It is a network scanning tool. You can scan, you connect to a Wi-Fi or any public network, and if they don't have a router properly segmented, right? In general, if you have guest Wi-Fi, the best way to do guest Wi-Fi is isolate all the devices. So it's just a device connected directly to the internet. This is what they do at a lot of hacking conventions to try and prevent hackers from hacking each other, right? But if you're lazy, or you just are ignorant and don't know how to set it up properly, you might just leave it open. And you might leave it open for other reasons. Perhaps you want devices to connect to each other on the guest network. But despite this, that means when you connect to that, I can see all the devices on the network. So I ran this scan, it took maybe a minute, and I found out, well, I know they're running a Fortinet router. I can see a lot of devices. So there's an iPhone, there's a Microsoft device, there's some more iPhones, a Samsung phone. I can just keep going. Yeah, and see the different devices on the network. Now I've gathered more information. So now I see all their devices on the network. I know what router they have. I can actually actively, after I do scanning, I can start to potentially, in the next step, take this information and start exploiting.
Person. So you mentioned that you can do that under the condition that router is set up how?
So there's ways to set up a router so you isolate guests between each other so they can't actually ping or connect to other guests. on the router, but by default, most routers don't come like that. They come like a normal network, right? You have standard IP address set up like 192.168, whatever it might be for default. And then you can ping or connect to any other device on that network. If I'm getting set up for a home network or something, that's great, right? Because I want all my devices to be able to connect to each other. But if I'm setting up a guest Wi-Fi that I'm going to have people connect to and I don't know who they are, that's not such a good idea necessarily, unless there's specific devices I need them to connect to. In that case, I should make sure that they can only connect to those
On
devices.
plane is really scary. So they don't configure it correctly on a plane. You don't even have to go log in and pay for Wi-Fi. You can run Fing, depend enough so the payment one and scan all of that. Find their valid information. That's extremely scary on a plane. Every plane I've been on.
And so there's been a couple of times I've actually gone in, I've connected to guest Wi-Fi, and they are isolated. I can't get anywhere, I can't scan any devices. So there are some places that set up properly, and some commercial grade routers will come configured, or depending on the service provider, will configure it that way, but a lot of them don't.
So they'll allow access to the internet connection.
Correct. You can get them set up. There is configuration involved in that, and it will depend on the vendor. But that's what I recommend when doing a guest Wi-Fi hotspot. Otherwise, it's always from my professional security opinion, never have guest Wi-Fi if you don't need it. It's a liability.
So one other comment, maybe just a little bit off topic, but I've been going with Wi-Fi, they're coffee shops and whatever. And every now and again I notice they have port 3389 disabled, so I can't do remote desktop connection. But not everyone does, right? So is that what's up with that? Why would they disallow remote desktop connection?
Because they probably don't want people trying to connect via remote desktop with other people that connect to the Wi-Fi. So that's their way of trying to segment devices without actually segmenting. So in a truly segmented guest Wi-Fi environment, you won't be able to see any other devices or connected.
Would it be fair to say it's almost like even though they're connecting to the same router, they're only connecting to their own network?
Yes, in a way.
Is it VLAN?
I have to look at the configuration. I can't tell you what the specific configuration, it varies by. But if you download this app, which is by the way free for Android, iPhone, it might have been on Windows Phone, but anyone still has that. But that's just one scanning tool. So let's try a different scanning tool. So this is a web scanning tool called Meetup. And we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna scan a WordPress website that I have set up to see if there's any misconfigurations. So it's gonna scan there, it's doing its initial scan. It's already identified that it's a WordPress website, it's pretty fast. And it's gonna run through and it says that there's some, I don't have the cross-site scripting header protection defined, some other issues with that, and you can see it found the WordPress login. So Meetup is a great tool, it's a free open source tool for Kali Linux you can use for testing websites. I don't recommend testing it on live websites because unlike the reconnaissance we were doing before, Meetup is very loud. So compared to other tools, it's extremely noisy. So if you're using Meetup on a website, that administrator, unless they're sleeping, is going to know you're trying to hack into their website. And in some cases, it can actually cause websites to crash. So I don't recommend doing it in a production environment, but for testing websites in a non-production environment, Meetup is very fine with vulnerabilities. So that's another example of scanning. So here's another example of scanning. This is OWASP, and we're going to talk about this. It's what we call an intercepting proxy. What this does is it actually sits between your computer and the website you're accessing, and it examines every piece of traffic as it's going across, and it looks for potential vulnerabilities. So in this case, again, we're scanning a web application, DVWA, which stands for Damn Vulnerable Web Application. I'm not making that up. And I'll go through and scan, it'll actually spider the entire website. If you actually see there, it's going through every single page on the entire website and running scans still. Now again, this is a noisy process, and an intercepting browser can be noisy, so it makes a lot more sense, as we'll see later, to do a page at a time. Now, if we look here at the results, we can see it actually found a SQL injection. It found some issues with directory browsing, where security isn't enforced, found some various other issues. So that's another tool that can be used for the scanning phase. So gaining access. So this is the fun part, right? We've gathered all of our information. So now we actually get to the meat of what is most people consider hacking. Like, how do I actually break into an application? So once you have your target defined and you have all your statistics, you can start using vulnerabilities and taking advantage of them. So here's a website that I want to log into, and take a guess how hard this one will be to hack into. I'm going to do what's called SQL injection. We're going to inject into this login screen. My username is Alice. I'm going to get in as Alice. I know what the username is. I don't know what the password is. Invalid credentials. Well, what if well, look. So for anyone that missed that, what the pound sign did right there in PHP, this is a PHP application, it actually commented out the rest of the line for that SQL statement. So the statement goes, it's going to check for the username, Alice, right? So, and then it's going to check Alice and if password equals, right? But what I did was, I inserted a comment bar to comment out the rest of the line in the code, as if it didn't exist. So it basically said, okay, Alice, okay, you are Alice, log in. And that is SQL injection. Now there's lots of ways, and we'll go over a couple ways to avoid SQL injection, but this is still the most common way that hackers break into applications. Is injection flaws. We'll look at a couple different injection flaws. Let's just warm up. So now we're gonna look at a more sophisticated attack. So we looked at how you get into a web attack, but how do you get in from, say, I have a Windows desktop? How would a hacker break into that? Well, the first thing they do is they use this tool. It's called Metasploit. And what Metasploit can do is it can create what's called a reverse connection, a reverse TCP connection. And what that's going to allow you to do is actually going to give you remote access into another computer. It will actually go and create the software needed to run on a person's computer, and then connect back to your malicious computer that you have set up. So you can think about it as, you know, if someone sent you a package and had a bomb in it, right, this is what we'd be creating. So, this video. Oh, there we go. So we're going to go and we're actually going to download this package that we just created, because I created two packages. Created a package for listening for when this package is executed. And I create a separate package for executing on a person's computer. So those are the two packages I've created. We're going to download this exe file, and I know no one here ever has users that would ever download and run any strange exe files or driver files or anything like that. So this can also be implemented in PDF or Word documents, so don't worry. If they open those, they can also get infected. So we're going to go ahead and run this, and Windows 10 is going to actually be really nice and tell us this is not a good file. It's going to say, hey, this isn't a good file. It's not a registered file, but we're going to ignore that because, you know, Windows is full of it, doesn't know what it's talking about. So now we've run that, and nothing has really happened as far as we can tell. But back on our hacking console that's using the software called Metasploit, we actually have an open connection to that Windows 10 computer from that open. So now their computer's actually communicating back. And whatever level of access that user has, I now have that same level of access. If we go in, I can actually see, there's the desktop right there. So I can actually see I have access directly onto their desktop. And to prove it, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put a file on their desktop. We're gonna say I hacked you.txt, because that seems like a scary file. Anyone who got on their desktop would not be too proud of. And this is using standard Linux tools, so to edit files. So, pay me some ransom money, please. Add it, please. People are more likely to pay. So right there you can see we have the I hacked you.txt file, and if we open it we can see, hey, you hacked it. Now, again, you can go a step further with this. I'm already in their system. I can then use this system to go to additional systems. I can use this system and just sit there quietly and collect information. I can install a proxy like we just talked about and start gathering information. There's a whole bunch of things I can do. But that's basically the premise of how it works.
What port is it using?
You define the port. So
hide it in like port.
you can hide it in any port. A lot of them like to actually hide it in port HTTPS. And they'll actually use an HTTPS connection, so they actually encrypt their traffic. Which is funny, because I can't actually get businesses to do that, but hackers will do that all day long.
So that the same thing as a reverse job?
Yeah, it is a reverse job. So the next step. So not really anything fancy with the next step. Once we're into a system, whether it be a website or a computer, the next step is we want to make sure we stay on that computer. So we're going to try and install additional software, potentially compromise other systems, and begin to exfiltrate sensitive data and information. So that's going to be part of the maintaining access part. We're going to stay in for as long as we can. And by the way, the industry average for detecting when someone has breached into your system is 9 months. It takes 9 months on average to figure out they're in your system. But companies have gone years, not even years, like a lot of years. I heard about Macs that were infected for 10 years, hackers were in their systems. But they didn't install antivirus on their Macs because they're Macs. Who would hack those? So maintaining access, not a lot. The next part is pretty important. So covering tracks. So once hackers have everything they want to make it look like they've never been there. And they use a lot of different tools. There's a lot of different anti-forensics tools, and we won't really get into that. It's kind of out of the scope of this discussion. But they use different tools. The popular one is called TimeStop. It's in Metasploit. You can actually go and change any of the log files to be any date you want them to. So if you access the log file on this date, you can say, nope, gonna make it look like someone accessed it on this date, we're gonna make it Bobby access the file. So I can make it look like different people access the file. And that's a popular method that people will use. They'll change those log files. Normally a smart hacker won't just delete all the files, because then that's suspicious. Why are we missing 3 days worth of files between this time and this time? That's not, that's weird. But some companies will be like, well, that's weird, stuff happens, which, no, they don't. But I digress. That's covering trends. And that ends part 1, so now we're going to talk about part 2. We're going to focus specifically on web hacking. So, we're going to talk about vulnerability scanning versus penetration testing. And I get this question a lot, and a lot of people confuse this. What is the difference? So vulnerability scanning, you're using an automated scanner to find potential vulnerabilities in your website, web application, or your desktop or server applications. They're potential because you don't actually know if they're exploitable, right? So the tool says they're exploitable, but you don't actually know because you haven't tried them. Penetration testing is where you actually go through and try and exploit it. You're like, well, I think I have a SQL injection here. Let's see if I can actually compromise this website. And then when you go in, and if you can prove, yes, I compromised it, or no, I wasn't able to, you can figure out what mitigating controls you might have in place to prevent a hacker from getting to them. In cybersecurity, we often talk about a segmentation, like I talked about with guest Wi-Fi, right? So the mitigating factor there is I'm going to isolate the user. So even though I have guest Wi-Fi, I'm not going to be able to connect to them, right? So if there's vulnerabilities on these machines that can exploit, they're not going to be able to take advantage of them. So that's the difference. And oftentimes I find more and more in the corporate environment, you're asked to prove it a lot. So pen testing becomes increasingly important. You know, say there's a vulnerability, Brandon, show me that it's really possible. Show me, is it really gonna damage this? Well, in some cases, yes. In other cases, you might have a compensating control. So where do I start, and what really is a secure web application? Well, that's a matter of contention, because the idea of something being secure is always debatable, right? Because there's new hacks coming out all the time. But this great company called OWASP, and they're more of a nonprofit organization than a company, they provide a bunch of free resources for actually testing your web applications and determining if your web application meets the criteria of what would be considered a secure web application. So they provide 2 documents. One is the OWASP testing guide, and another one is the application security verification standard, which is too many words. So you can download those for free off the OWASP website. And then the next part is going to be you can use tools such as BLab to test on an insecure application. So you get to learn. It doesn't matter what programming language specifically you're developing in. A lot of these things are going to be common in all programming. So regardless of your web application, you're going to see these vulnerabilities. So the software development lifecycle test framework, as defined by OWASP, this is the test framework that they recommend for every, and I mean every software project that you're working on. So review process is a lot here. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but there's a lot here. Code review, penetration testing, all kinds of unit testing, health checks, verification, regression testing. And in every environment I've been in, there's very few that actually follow this to the letter. But if you want your application to be secure, these are really the steps that you have to take. This is what I would recommend if you're a bank or you contain a lot of sensitive data or sensitive customer data, which thanks to new policies and laws and regulations is becoming more critical. This is the process to follow. So what do we test for when we're testing web application? Because there's these different errors and what's important. So OWASP does a survey of all the top companies, and they determine what is the web application flaws we need to test. And they came up with a top 10. They've been updating this top 10 for a number of years. I think we're in version 4, which came out in 2017. So these are the top 10. The first one, as I said, was SQL injection or just injection in general. So as we saw before, injection is pretty easy to exploit and it can cause a lot of issues, but is still the number one most common. It has Django, which has their own ORM that prevents a lot of these. So that's what I recommend use. Another way you can do it is if you're using Microsoft SQL Server, you can use stored procedures. If you're using stored procedures, this can help prevent SQL injection. And in general, you should sanitize your user data. Never trust that someone will intend to use whatever application they're building the way it's intended. Imagine that they'll use it for every way except what it's intended. When you're doing your security tests, when you're doing your actual testing, make sure it actually does what it needs to. So next one is broken authentication. So authentication should be simple, it should be centralized, and it should be standardized. So you don't want your authentication all over the place. Uber actually had some issues with this, where they had a website calling out to another website to get authentication. The hacker was actually able to take advantage of that to log in as another user. So Uber actually had this issue. So you really want to centralize your authentication, right? Having single sign-on isn't a bad thing. You want to control that something. So the other thing to be aware of with broken authentication, hackers will take advantage of your forgot password logic every time, and they do. Sensitive data exposure. So I can't stress this enough. Please run your websites in HTTPS. Please. Let's Encrypt as a service that lets you get an SSL certificate for free. And literally, you don't have to pay anything for it. So I recommend everyone use HTTPS. It will not slow down your website because HTTPS is on HTTP 2.0 protocol, which is actually faster than the 1.0 protocol that all non-HTTP websites run. So by upgrading and encrypting your website, it will actually be faster. So there's no reason not to encrypt in transit for your data. And you want to encrypt the sensitive data in your databases. When I was doing consulting for an organization before, I walked in and it was a restaurant. I'm not going to mention names if I'm not allowed to, NDA. But this restaurant, they had on their POS systems, they had over 3 years of credit card data. And that company ended up, they were breached. And they got all that credit card data, right? They didn't have any of it encrypted. Not a bit of, not that it would have mattered, because a hacker probably could have decrypted any amount of time it took them to discover there was a breach. It was about 9 months till they discovered there was a breach. They'd lost everything. And the only reason this company found out that they were breached was the Secret Service showed up on the front door. Said we have reports of people's information being used, and the common point is your restaurants. It's important to encrypt your data. If it's sensitive, encrypt it.
But not just sensitive being personal too.
Yes, so sensitive, and you can look it up, it's going to vary by organization. If you're a healthcare organization, follow the HIPAA law, it's a law, not just guidelines. If you're a different organization, it's going to relate differently. So the next one is rather new, it has to do with XML. I won't go over it a lot, but if your application accepts XML directly or XML uploads from untrusted sources, you want to be careful what is being injected. Their recommendation specifically is to use less complex formats such as JSON and avoid serialization of sensitive data from people tampering with APIs. Some of this could be related to bad security protocols and APIs and bad implementation, but it's been voted enough that this is now made number 4 on the list. So broken access control. So this is pretty simple, right? If you have a My Secure website, I have an example there, sensitive account details, ID equals 304. If I change that to 305, I should not be able to see 305's account information. I kid you not, I work for a government agency, I can't. A government contractor on behalf of a government agency, they had a sensitive government information with data, right? Inside the information, you could change the ID and see other people's data and change other people's data. And this application was for calculating taxes. I could go in and modify people's taxes. Why would I do that? I don't know, but I shouldn't be able to.
Oh, I did send you the check, didn't I?
I'm still waiting for it.
It bounced.
Whatever agency was that? Never mind.
So A6, security misconfigurations, right? So this one, I don't need to show a complicated example of this. People misconfigure things, right? You don't always have the expertise you need to configure applications properly. This is most common with cloud-based applications. So BugCrowd said the biggest bug bounties that they tend to get, and I mean biggest by most, is insecure AWS cloud instances. That's what they get more than anything. And it's not really a vulnerability per se, other than the fact that they configured it. So regardless of how you're building your applications, always be sure to make sure you're using best practices and configure your applications properly. Can't stress that enough. So, won't go too much detail. The other one is cross-site scripting. So I run a script on a web page, right? So the most popular form of this was back when we had MySpace. Could inject some code on MySpace website, and anyone that visited it, it would run that code, right? So a popular form of that is if I can inject code, maybe I can steal the cookies or the session of whoever visits, and I can log in as them. So there's lots of nifty things you can do with this. This used to be number 2 back in 2013. This has dropped down to number 7, which I feel like means we're making progress, but it could also mean other 6 are just that prevalent. This is still very prevalent, one will see it a lot. So one of the best ways to avoid this is having content security policy. And what that means to have a content security policy is you're not going to load any JavaScript or additional files on your server or application other than the ones you specify. So if you have a content security policy, you specify specifically where you're going to load all your files, and then nothing else. So if someone tries to inject files into it, the website will not allow it. So it's very important. That's a good way to avoid cross-site scripting, but it's still one of the biggest vulnerabilities that's. So this goes along with the other one, in security serialization, the ability to change serialized objects and APIs, manipulate them, right? So credit bureau communicating with an API, I can mess with someone's credit data, in transit from serialization. So this one's a big one. Using components with known vulnerabilities, right? So if you're running Windows XP, you're using a component that has known vulnerabilities. If you're running, a very old website or very old frameworks that aren't updated, they have vulnerabilities in them, and they need to be updated. Equifax was hacked because of a known vulnerability in Apache struts that they were using. And they were told about it. The executives were actually told, hey, we have this vulnerability. We need to fix it. We could lose all the data. They said, we don't have time to fix it. And then when that executive got up in front of Congress, he's like, they didn't stress enough to me how severe this vulnerability is. They had 125 IT security people employed at Equifax, where their job was IT security. And they stressed that this issue needed to be fixed. There needed to be downtime related to fix this issue, and they used. There's cost risk to everything. And in this case, their risk did not pay off. So one way you can find out about different components if you use them, you can visit exploit-db.com. or the government sponsor, nvd.nis.gov, contains, you can search ASP.NET, you can search all kinds of different libraries and frameworks and software. It will tell you what the latest vulnerabilities are, whether it's been patched or not, and what the patch version is. I recommend looking there. I know I do. So number 10, insufficient logging and monitoring. You can never log enough. I always like to say visibility, visibility, visibility. The more I can see, the better. So in this case, you want to ensure you have logging turned on for all your applications. You'd be surprised how many companies I worked with that had a security incident. They said, well, we didn't have logging turned on. In your custom web applications, you want to make sure you have proper logging. You don't want to fail silently or issues to fail. You always want them to raise some kind of alert. And you want to centralize your logs where possible and review as needed. If you don't centralize your logs and you don't review them, then there's no point in having them. And now, that's it for the top 10. I know that was a lot. We're getting to the fun stuff. So Kali Linux, here's some of the security tools. Kali Linux is one of them, open source. Security has all of the different tools for hacking and ethical hacking. Metasploit, that's the tool we talked about. That's a link to a free website for learning how to hack into applications like I showed up here. Right? If you're gonna hack ethically, because if you don't, you'll go to jail. 3 to 5 years. For at least. So we're going to talk a little bit about OWASP stack. We talked a little bit about before the intercepting proxy. We're going to talk about Burp Suite. And then I wanted to mention this tool called Archery. So Archery Sec is a relatively new tool. It came around in January. It's a tool that is built for developers for testing your web applications for vulnerabilities. What the tool does is it integrates, built on Python, which is another reason I love it, right? But it aggregates all the web scanners together so you can actually automate your testing. So it's not hard to set up. I recommend taking a look at it. It's still somewhat in its infancy, but it's gaining momentum.
Got a quick question for you. Sure. I'm gonna build a pen, a test this. Are you on Windows or on Linux?
I recommend, I recommend Linux, and you should probably run Kali Linux because it has the tools built in. You could download the tools separately, but Kali will give you the most comprehensive set of tools. I actually run several tools, so I'll have Kali Linux, but then I have additional boxes for testing various things. It makes sense to have a test Windows box to test different exploits, right? So actually test your antivirus to see if it can actually, it's the antivirus. If I write a custom virus right there and it doesn't notice anything funny, I'm gonna give it a weird look, right? Most viruses are actually written in PowerShell nowadays, believe it or not. So detecting that's really important. So some of the tools that you can use for doing some testing is WebGo. It's an open source security training tool. Another one, my personal favorite, is VWAP. And then another great resource is Hack Explaining. It's a website that will actually go through each of these web hacks, and you can actually see the different hacks in action. Actually go through a tiny tutorial, it takes about 30 seconds. So let's talk about OWASP stack. It's an easy to use integrated pen testing tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. It is open source, and you can automate scanners for manually finding vulnerabilities. So if you have a very low budget, right, and you have to have a tool, Zap is great. But there's another tool that's the industry standard, and it's called Burp Suite. So Burp Suite is a commercial tool. It includes an automatic crawl. It can automatically scan for hundreds of different vulnerabilities. It can intercept traffic as a man in the middle. It can automate custom attacks. And it's extensible through, I'm gonna say it again, Python. In case you're wondering, you should learn Python. Almost all hacking tools are written in Python, except for the zealots that have redeveloped by recommending Ruby. But Python and Java. Burp is considered the web penetration testing tool standard. It's what a lot of the bug bounty hunters use. It's a very good tool, as we'll see in a second. I'll do a short live demo of some of its capabilities. It costs $350 per person for a commercial license. And they have over 13,000 licenses to date of their professional domain. They have a free version with less functionality. Over 100,000 people use the free version. I recommend this tool to anyone who is serious about doing web application testing in their environment. All right, so let's take a look at Burp. So we have our website here, our VWAP, which is an extremely buggy web app. Right, that seems legit. So we're gonna log in here. It's not gonna take us there right away, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna bring up, this is the Burp interface right here. And it's actually, it caught all that information. So if we look here, you can actually see it's showing us all the headers and traffic information that are going through. So if I look I look here, I can see all that information, and then I can choose to drop that information, modify it, or forward it to the person. This is why it's called an intercepting proxy. It's intercepting all that communication. So we're gonna go ahead and forward that communication. And we can actually see that it started what we call spidering the website. So it's actually going and looking at all those files in the website. And any file that's any file that's grayed out means that we actually haven't requested that file. And we can actually sort, and it will keep track of how many parts of a website we've actually hacked into. We can then automate these different attacks and repeat them to test various attack scenarios against these websites. It's a very sophisticated tool. It's complicated, but it's very powerful once you learn how to use it.